Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Music Den. I'm your host, Armando Venditti. Hoping you guys are having a really good day. And above all else, that you're indeed looking after yourselves and one another. Ladies and gentlemen, myself and the crew are back with 50th Album Anniversaries Part 2, celebrating albums that were released in June of 1975. We have the last four in the batch of eight that we're going to talk about today. Um, and this is quite the list, depending who you talk to about this list. Anyways, um, coming in at number one on the list for part two, we have Uriah Heep with Return to Fantasy. It is the band's eighth release, released on June 13th, another June 13th release of 1975 through Bronze Records, uh, reaching number whopping 85 in the US, a whopping 83, yeah, rock on, 83 in Canada, and seven in the UK charts. It was recorded in the spring of 75, produced by Jerry Braun, and has a playing time of, if I didn't already say this, 40 minutes and 35 seconds. And I should say that this incarnation of Uriah Heep features John Wetton on bass and backing vocals. Uh, John Wetton, of course, of King Crimson fame, various bands. So, but before I give my opinion on this album, oh, who am I going to pick on? Ken.
Okay. All right. All right. All right.
Go for it.
I don't remember this album, from back in the day when I was a wee 16-year-old lad living in the woods of North Florida. Um,
He
With
fought
that
for his
accent?
dinner, ladies and gentlemen, in the
I
woods.
know that accent has nothing to do with it. Um,
He went hunting for his dinner, ladies and gentlemen, in the woods.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's all.
really. Um, but I've never been a heavy metal fan. Uh, this was an interesting listen. I was only familiar with, um, the hits from the day, um, but the title says it all. Return to Fantasy. This is their return to, um, I guess, what I'd call fantasy metal. It's also labeled as prog and stuff like that. This has all of the mid 70s vibes and feels, as far as production and music too. And while it's not exactly in my wheel bag, it's not nearly as bad as many of the other similarly genred albums at the time. Um, I thought there were some very interesting moments in it. Um, uh, Whereas I know Martin Popoff has been very critical about the recording and the mixing, but I kind of liked it. Maybe it's because the guitar wasn't quite so in your face in the mix. Um, I felt it was much more balanced within the rest of the instruments, which I liked. Um, but so it's like, okay, I listened through the whole album. It's like, that's interesting. That's interesting. Nothing reached out and grabbed me. So, like I said, it's better than a lot of the other bands and albums of this time of the same genre for me. So my rating of meh is actually a compliment. So
Okay.
it's like, okay, this was I'm glad I heard it, and there might be the odd chance that I might want to go visit it again, or maybe some their other albums that may not be so popular, because maybe I would like the non-popular stuff more than what really sold, since I'm not a metalhead.
Okay.
So there you
Well,
go.
fair enough. Jim.
The first association that I have with Uriah Heep is with a head shop in the town that I grew up with. Um, they had lots of Uriah Heep posters. and their albums were strewn throughout the record shop. And that's sort of my first association that I have with Uriah Heep. Um, I have listened to a couple of their albums more recently, and to me, Uriah Heep is just kind of an indistinct pile. I'm kind of echoing what Ken's comments are, but I'm being just a little more harsh, just because I can't really,
Not you.
grab my. Yes, I'm being harsh. I'm wearing black. I'm being harsh. Um, the Yeah, I just don't find anything in here that's like really distinctive. It just kind of sounds like um uh what the stereotype of, like, progressive metal spinal tapish type stuff might be. I mean, yeah, you're right to mention that John Wetton is playing bass on here, and I think does some backing vocals. Um, Wetton is not contributing to any of the songwriting. I think this was just a quick step um, from the ashes of King Crimson for him. I know the next album he did do some writing on, but again, this is not a John Wetton album. He's a part of the band, but
He is firmly placed in the background.
he is firmly placed in the background. And with someone like Wetton in your band, that's a horrible place to put him,
Why?
because
Yeah, yeah,
he's so good with the bass, and his at that time his vocals were just so powerfully melodic.
yeah.
It's a shame to sort of relegate him in that, and it's no wonder that shortly after this he created UK with Bruford and Holsworth and Jobson.
Yep.
So um, yeah, I mean I wish I had anything kind of concrete to give about this album, but to me, it's like I said, it's an indistinct pile. And if Ken, I'm just kind of curious as to what the other albums of this similar ilk around this time that you kind of associate this with. You had mentioned that earlier. Yeah, you're on mute, brother.
You're muted.
Sorry, I muted it when I had a coughing fit. Um, since this isn't really my genre, I can't really say, but just in general, the fantasy prog, or just fantasy metal at the time. But
Yep.
and I just remember at the time hearing the other stuff and really being turned off by it more so than this. That doesn't mean that this is something I'm gonna, you know, it's I was
You're
pleasantly not offended by it,
all
if that
right.
makes any sense. It's like, okay, this isn't as bad as I expected it to be.
Hmm.
Um, um, if I were to really say, okay, I want to listen to some fantasy metal prog or whatever, this would be what I would go to. Not that I would do that, but you um, yeah, it's for a genre that's not my thing. It's like, okay, well, eh, not,
Okay.
oh my
All right.
God,
Well,
no.
fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Let me see here from me. Well, meh.
All
It
right.
like I have some early Uriah Heep. I have Salisbury. Um, is it the magician's birthday? The wizard's birthday? I think it is. I have those albums still. I started to get into, and the debut album. I started to get into Uriah Heep. Wanted to listen to some of the early stuff, and a new band to listen to, a new, just to get into something different. But to listen to this album, what kind of gets it from, I don't want to say ruins it, but it's Byron's vocals. I just, it's very bravado, like kind of the way he delivers there's nothing really memorable about his vocal delivery to me on this
Well,
album. And you know, the one single from the album, Prima Donna, is like, oh, it's all right. I mean, but there's nothing memorable about it in terms of the melodies and the composition overall. I just,
you're right. I agree.
I don't know. I don't know. Um, I guess you can call it a transitional album. Transition to what? I have no idea. But it's just not a memorable album for me in that respect. And I do agree with you. I think John Wetton's talents are wasted uh, on this album. You almost kind of got the feeling like he was kind of like waiting for something else to come along to move on to before he like this is uh like a stopgap kind of thing for him, and then find something else to go on to kind of a thing. But
Maybe he had to pay for a boat or something, you know.
who knows?
Well,
Who knows?
maybe.
But it's not a very memorable album at all. Um, so, but moving on.
The other comment
Sorry.
that I'll make about this is that this album reminds me of kind of the inspiration point of this really fun but weird album that came out from the Numero Group. And the Numero Group is a label much like Rhino that sort of excavates and cultivates these collections of different genres of music. And one of the ones that they did was an album in 2014 of a collection of proto metal and heavy psych bands that just never went anywhere in the US. And it was called Dark Scorch Canticles. And that sort of gives you
Okay.
the vibe of what they were. I mean, it says in looking at the Great Big Encyclopedia in the Sky that, this Dark Scorch Canticles album. I mean, these guys, the bands on here drew their influences from Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, Black Sabbath, and you've got bands on here with names like let's see. Air, Wrath, Stonehenge, Triton Warrior, Stone Axe, Stoned Mace, Arrogance. I mean,
I
this all
sense a
just kind of
theme.
sounds like it's in this genre. And if people wanted to go down this road, frankly, I would recommend the Dark Scorch Canticles album from Numero Group that was released in 2014 for at least a bit of a better laugh.
I get it. I get it. It's unfortunate, but I get it. Okay. Moving on, our next album on the list, celebrating its 50th anniversary. Um, Neil Young with Tonight's the Night. It is Neil Young's sixth release, released on June 20th, 1975, for his longtime label, Reprise Records. Um, with a playing time of 44 minutes and 52 seconds. In terms of chart position, it reached number 39 in the US charts, number 12 in the Canadian charts, big surprise, and number 48 in the UK charts. The album was recorded from August to September of 1973, and the album was produced by David Briggs and Neil Young. Now, the history on this album that I read was that Neil Young was on his way to a recording session with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And on his way to the recording session, he showed up at David Briggs' apartment, knocked on the door, and said, "Do you want to go record an album together?" Neil Young was always restless when it came to doing whatever he wanted to do. And if it meant breaking away from Crosby, Stills, and Nash just in the midst of doing something with him, just taking a complete left or right turn, he would do it. So they decided to go and record some songs that Neil had written. And I think at this point he just got tired of recording with Crosby, Stills, and Nash for this particular point in time. But you know what? Um, Again, that's the information that I've got. So that's all up for you people out there to decide and think about. And before I give my 2 cents on this album, Jim, what do you think of tonight's night?
Oh dear. Um,
I know where this is
it's
going.
it well, it's really hard for me to, I think, give a fair assessment of Neil Young's work. Um, I think that as a songwriter and a creator of specific songs, he's pretty dang fantastic. I think, the triple album Decade is, one of the greatest hits there is. And, one could argue that if you have Decade as opposed to any of his other stuff from the, latter part of the 70s backward, you're going to be doing just fine.
Mhm.
Um, Neil has also produced one of my favorite albums from the 80s, which is Freedom. And I love that album because it's such a diverse, um, it's Neil Young has his specific wheel bag that he stays in.
Mhm.
And even if he's playing something that's acoustic or electric, maybe it's more folksy or more grungy, you hear it and you're like, okay, that's Neil Young. It's just pretty instantly recognizable from, how he writes songs and the chord changes and whatnot. Neil Young is Neil Young is Neil Young, no matter what box of paints he's playing with. And I
Yes.
guess that's the problem that I have with Tonight's the Night, is that it's it's just another Neil Young record. He's haunted, strung out, stoner Neil Young, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of like I feel like I've heard this before. And to me, it's not quite an indistinct pile that the way that the Uriah Heep album is. I mean, there's some nice stuff on it. My problem is that I feel like I've heard it all before. And it's very hard for me to be objective about Tonight's the Night because I, I just got to have this been there, done that feel with it. Um,
I get it.
but there's many people I know who hold this album in very, very high regard. And I can understand that and have empathy towards it, especially as it's dealing with, I think a lot of this is a direct result of someone in Crazy Horse who died from a heroin overdose. So there's that sort of emotional wrenching that's sort of going on in it. But again, at the end of the day, it just sounds like another Neil Young album to me. And so I feel like I'm not giving it its proper due, but again, I can't penetrate into it anymore because it's just Neil Young.
Well, I mean, you're just giving your honest opinion. I mean, and that's all anybody can ever do. So there's no harm again in that. Um, you know, I would rather you give your honest opinion and try and describe something, give a description of an album when you're not really feeling that description of an album. Do you know what I mean? Like, and
Like
people,
what I did with Mob Deep.
yeah, we won't even go there.
That was
Okay.
a head fake, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, we won't even go there. Okay, Ken.
Okay. I don't vary too far away from what Jim said.
Okay, good
Uh,
night, folks. Go on, go
yeah.
on.
Um, this album has very scaled back production, which I think contributes to its success. And for the love, I think it works. I think it works well because even Neil Young, heavily produced, is still Neil Young. You like the saying goes, you could cover a turd in chocolate, but it's still a turd. Um, but yes, you're right, Jim. The album is largely about grief. There was the band member from Crazy Horse, the guitarist Danny Whitten, but
Mm.
also a roadie and a friend whose name escapes me right now. They had both recently died of heroin overdoses. And I find it interesting, between songs like Needle and the Damage Done and a lot of that on here, chronicling the destruction that drugs will do, yet they still did them. Um, anyway, it's another Neil Young album. A lot of the stuff is rather forgetful. The best track for me is New Mama. But even then, I like Stephen Stills' version of the song better, which was actually released just 3 days later on his debut solo album. Um, but overall, the album is okay. I agree. We got another Neil Young solo album. I can see how for Neil Young fans this would be held in high regard. Um, but it was interesting. Like I say, I still like the song "New Mama," but that's about as far as it goes for me. I agree.
Okay. Um, well, for me, this just feels like he just wanted to go and record some ideas that he had. And then you know, the ideas were flushed out into fully fledged songs. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think at this point, maybe he was getting a little bit tired of churning out the albums for reprise, like giving an album into the record company just to, churn out an album. And he was, I mean, again, the story is he was on his way to a recording session. Sorry, only two sips of coffee, ladies and gentlemen. I'm screwed up. He was on his way to a recording session for Crosby, Stills and Nash, and he just did an about face and showed up at David Briggs' door and said, "Do you want to go record some music?" Like it's like, let's just go do something different. Let's just go do the opposite of what I was supposed to do right now, and just flush these ideas out. Whether they come out or not, it's up to me. It's not up to, the rest of the band in that band context kind of thing. And it shows on this album. I mean, my favorite song in the album is Borrowed Tune, which he obviously took from the Rolling Stones with Lady Jane. And he says, I took this idea from the Rolling Stones in the lyrics. So he's wearing his heart on his sleeve and his ideas are on his sleeve. Like he's not saying that these songs are any better than ones that he's written before. These are just ideas that he wanted to come up with. Um, it's okay. It's pretty much the same for every song. It's not anything different than anything that he did before. This is in no way a comparison to Harvest because I think Harvest is a great album. But this is just him experimenting. And Neil Young has always been an artist about doing whatever the hell he wanted to do. I mean, You mentioned you mentioned Freedom in '89. My favorite album is Trans from '82.
Oh,
You,
wow.
you
That's a
know,
bold move, sir.
and there's a story behind that album. The reason why he did Trans was because he has a son. He had a son with cerebral palsy who was nonverbal, and the computerized or digitized voices that he did on Trans, I'm paraphrasing here, but I think he felt that that was how his son was hearing or how he was able to communicate with his son, how his son was hearing the voices coming back to him, right? How he was sort of being able to communicate, through his son. And again, I'm not giving you a proper explanation of it, but his son was the inspiration for Trans. So that's why I think the album Trans was a bold move. But for this album, yeah, it's a Neil Young album of ideas, whether they're fully flushed or flushed out or pr put together properly. It's up to the listener. But it's not it's not an album I would go back to. I almost did buy this album once, and I'm glad I didn't, but that's another issue altogether. So, um, there you have it. Tonight's the night. Now, moving on. We have Frank Zappa. One size fits all. That's a falsehood, by the way. We won't even go there. Okay. One size fits all, ladies and gentlemen. It is Frank Zappa's 14th release. It was released on June 25th, 1975 for, I believe, his own label, Discreet Records. Uh, Recorded from August 27th of 74 through to April of 75. Produced by Frank Zappa. Has a playing time of 43 minutes and 55 seconds. Now, I do have this album. I bought this album about 3 years ago, I believe. Before I give my insight into the album, Jim, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I just absolutely adore this album. Um, this was almost on my list for 31 perfect albums, um, but needed to excise it for room for something else that I just thought was, a little more perfect. The thing I like about, well, there are many things I like about One Size Fits All. First of all, it's got Zappa's arguably his best band ever. Uh, George Duke on keyboards, Ruth Underwood on percussion, Chester Thompson on drums, Tom Fowler on bass, Napoleon Murphy Brock on vocals, sax, flute. Um,
Multiple
there's
instruments.
probably an extended version of this band that also has Bruce Fowler on trombone. But anything in this era of like 73, 74, 75 is like peak Zappa in terms of the musicianship there. Um, this album is also very low on what I'll call prurient humor. Um, Zappa has made a name for himself as, you know, kind of saying there are no holds barred in musical themes or lyrical themes, shall we say. The two big examples there being Bobby Brown Goes Down and Dynamo Hum. There's no tunes like that on this record,
I
so
like
I
Dynamo
wouldn't
Home.
mind playing it for my parents, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, to me, this album is musically inventive without being um, like some of Zappa's classical compositions. So it's not dissonant. It's engaging and inventive and off-putting in parts, but it's not so off-putting that a casual listener can't find a connection point to it. Um, Zappa's guitar work on this album is really exploratory and distinctive to me. I think some will call it noodling. Some may just say it's just there's no cohesion to it. It's just like, whatever note he can find. I think that's part of the joy of Frank Zappa's guitar playing is that he can do something that's really interesting, but still very listenable as well. It's not just all out sheets of noise. Um, and lastly, the variety on this album is just outstanding. Inca Roads, which starts the album, is probably the best Zappa starter track there is in terms of really giving a new listener a sense of um, how creative he can get within a track musically. Um, and this is where my lack of being able to talk about musical structure um, kind of hits against a wall because
Well,
there's
you're
stuff
doing
that he's
good so
doing.
far.
Well, I feel like, I have a vocabulary for talking about these things, like, nested tuplets and just weird time measures and whatnot. And he's all about that stuff, but I don't know how to kind of say at this point in this song, he's doing
Exactly.
X, and
Exactly.
that's what makes it sound, so different. Um, but for everything that's like as wild and inventive as Inca Roads is, you've got something simple and bluesy like Can't Afford No Shoes, and then you've got something that's kind of almost classically genteel like Sofa, and then you get into this really sort of strange blues tune called Pajama People, which is about, Frank's issues about people running around with, in jammy onesies, much like our friend Ken did in our Christmas episodes with the bunny ears.
Kill the visual,
Um,
Jesus, kill the visual. Go on.
um, Florentine Pogan kind of continues that. Evelyn, a modified dog. I mean, what the heck is that about? Other than panchromatic pedal depressed resonance and other highly ambient domains. Um, San Bernardino is about, prison. Andy, there's a video essay on YouTube that's probably like 2 hours long that just gets into the musical and lyrical themes of Andy and how, you know, Frank may have been using that as sort of, a commentary of religion and faith and different and weird ways that people sort of handle that. But
Mhm.
again, it's couched in this weird thing of, well, couched in with these weird things about actor Andy Devine and also these kind of the more strangely polyrhythmic elements of this album kind of reside within this 6 minutes and 3 seconds of brilliance of the Andy tune. And then
Mhm.
it ends up with a reprise of Sofa, but this time it's got its lyrics in German because Frank can. And again, it's about a sofa. So I first got turned onto this album because I asked a coworker of mine who I knew was a big Zappa fan. I
Mhm.
said, "Look, I'd like to start to understand what makes Frank so well known, but I've had trouble finding an entry point. I like prog rock, I like jazz. I don't really want to hear, you know, songs like Dynamo Hum. So what do you have that kind of fits those criteria?" And he's like, "I know exactly the one for you." And that was One Size Fits All. And the first time I heard it, it like just ticked every box and thought it was just an absolutely amazing, funny, inventive, and unique album. I had never heard anything like it before, and it started me down my Zappa journey. And there have been a lot of doors that I've opened on Frank and quickly closed, much like the music of John Zorn. And I don't know if the letter Z is just the common denominator here. There's places that you go and discover that's not quite what I like, but I do like these other areas that he goes in. And I think that of the batch that we've discussed for 75 and the 50th anniversaries, I think One Size Fits All is my absolute favorite of the batch, and it's something that I have no problem recommending to people as a great place to kind of start their Zappa journey, should they be so inclined to go down that road.
You do so. Okay. Okay. Um, Thank you for that. Very interesting. Um, Now, what people have to understand and what people probably already know, or most people probably already know, Zappa was never one for lyrics dealing with, we met and the sky was blue that day and the leaves started to turn color and they fell gently to the ground as we looked into each other's eyes and we knew that we were the one for one another. You ain't gonna get that with Frank Zappa. You're gonna get Dynamo Hum, okay? You're gonna get St. Alfonso's Breakfast. You're gonna get stuff like that. You're not gonna get romantic true blue kind of I love you and let's go off and get married kind of lyrics.
Or
And
if you do, it's him talking about a dog.
exactly, exactly. This album for me is no different. This album again is coming off the high of um, Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe in terms of his arc of album releases. Uh, And I gotta tell you, this does continue in that vein in terms of songs of, the intricacies of Inca Roads, and then you go into Can't Afford No Shoes, and Sofa Number One. I mean, it continues. And the musicianship on this album, just the sheer bloody brilliance and talent of the musicians that he handpicked to be in this band and that wanted to be in this band. Um, you kind of get the feeling that, well, I kind of get the feeling with some artists that, you have the main character, or the main character, sorry, the main presence of the band, of the group, like the one person that it's, that the band is concentrated on, like, okay, Taylor Swift. You kind of get the feeling that the people that play with her or with any musician, okay, they're just kind of going along with the music because it's a paycheck and they want to get paid. That's why they're doing it. You don't get that feeling with this group of musicians. You get the feeling that they are in this for the long haul. They love what he's doing musically and they support it 1000%, i.e., Ruth Underwood. Okay. She was a devotee of his from the very beginning. And other people like Tom Fowler, etc., they went with it because they enjoyed what he was doing, because it was not the conventional type of music that was out there at the time. This album follows suit. It is fantastic. It is fantastic in that way. Um, and I mean, I still have to listen to it some more, but the standout tracks for me, again, are Inca Roads. So for number one, Po Jama People. Okay, how you can write a song for 7 minutes and 39 seconds about Po Jama People is beyond me, but he did it. Uh, Florentine Pogan, whatever the hell that is. Uh, Evelyn, a modified dog, San Bernardino. I mean, I was gonna say Bernardino, but San Bernardino again, fantastic. And Andy, I do believe, features Captain Beefheart on background vocals or co-lead vocals on this.
It's
Again,
either that or San Bernardino, but I
yeah,
know
one of
he's
the
in here
two, one of the
somewhere.
two, yeah. Um, but I think it's a fantastic album. I do have to listen to it some more. Is it as good as Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation? Jury's out on that still for me, but it's still a good album. And it's pretty much what I have to say on that. And I stepped on some feet today, on your toes. Ken, I overrode you. I went before you did. I apologize for that. I saw you were on mute, so I didn't like I just went for it. I apologize. Your take on it?
So our next album, ladies and gentlemen, is
You don't
okay.
say.
I'm sorry. I
I'm
really
gonna
am.
keep this very short and succinct.
Okay.
Really do appreciate the level of musicianship on this album, but for me, it's wasted. Um,
Ooh.
I've tried to get into Zappa. I bought several albums, back in the day, starting with Joe's Garage and another one that skips my mind at this time. Um, didn't really resonate with me, and um, and that was about the time I was playing in a band. So it's like, okay, well, I need to focus, my album money and time on stuff I need to learn for the band. Um, I I don't really connect with his sense of humor, so um, I'm very glad that there is this is lacking those blues songs. Um, lyrically, I probably would have found them very sophomoric and stuff like that. That's just me. Um, I don't like personally Zappa's. I don't like his vocals. Um, The songs that I've heard that he sings on sounds like maybe they'd be rejects from the Dr. Demento show. It just, it sounds like he's clowning around with his vocals, and it's like, okay. And so it sounds very similar. Um, Basically, what it boils down to is I like prog, but this is not my genre of prog. Um, Jim,
Fair enough.
you mentioned at the beginning of your thoughts, you used the term noodling. Yeah. My first line in my note says starts off okay, but quickly descends into major noodling. Um, I When I listen to music, um, most music, not all, but most music, I'm what's first in my mind, consciously or not, is where's a melody? And when you get into all the noodling and the varying structures and stuff like that, like I say, the musicians are killing it. They're knocking it out of the park. But where is the melody? And and I grew up, and all my roots are on melody. That's one of the things that makes the Beatles so great
Hmm.
was their melodies. You know, it was backed up by incredible song structure and progression and stuff like that. That's very unusual. I think they, for instance, the Beatles only wrote one song that had the standard 1 4 5 1 chord progression. How they were able to do everything else without that is just absolutely mind blowing. Because artists since then, unless they're jazz or prog or something like that, they don't do that. They stick with what's already been written. But anyway, I digress. This is just not my style of prog, and it's just I don't know, just no.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
That's the G-rated version of
You're gonna go G-rated on this channel? Are you kidding me?
Someone's
Please.
got to.
mine. Yeah,
Oh,
I
please.
find it interesting, especially with Jim. There's so much stuff that he and I see eye to eye on. Steely Dan, or stuff like that. Specifically, the album Asia, that we really connect with and stuff like that. But then there are um, of this large span
Yeah.
of stuff. And both for you too, Armando. I admire both of your broad width of musical taste. Mine, I don't know. The more I meet people like you that know more music and like a large variety, um, I just feel like, you know,
Well,
what's wrong with me? But it just doesn't resonate.
no, but that's just it. If we all said, "Oh, this album is great," if we had a list of like 10 albums and we all said, "Oh, this is wonderful, this is wonderful, this is wonderful." Hey, good night, folks. The show will be over in 2 minutes. I mean, where's the variety in that? There's,
Oh, I know, I
so
know,
I mean, and
I
I
know.
wouldn't say that, and thank you for the compliment. I wouldn't say that my
Well,
musical
sure.
tastes are that vast. Black MIDI, forget it. But moving on, we won't even go there. Um,
Well, I want to kind of circle back to what something that Ken said, and thank you also for the compliment, Ken. But again, I wouldn't sell yourself short, brother. I mean, you of the three of us, you're the guy who's like Steve Reich. Steve Reich is
yes,
amazing, and
yes.
he's a guy who is, as I've come to understand it, really messes with meter and time, and melody
Composition
is
and
kind of like a question mark in there.
yeah.
I'm just wondering what it is, and this is putting you on the spot, I realize, and you can tell me to just shut up, is like, what is it about Reich's music and those elements that
That
connect
connects
versus like Zappa?
in 20 words or less. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And of course with Steve Reich, just like you say with Zappa, there's some stuff that you listen to and say, okay, no, I'll leave this for someone else. Same thing with Steve Reich.
Okay.
Um, Part of Steve Reich's appeal to me that's different from Zappa. First of all, he's primarily a percussionist, so he's coming to his compositions more from a rhythmic aspect.
Hmm.
Um, I started my musical career playing percussion. Um, and so the rhythm is I find very, very interesting in what he does with it. Um, but I promise I'm going to finish my notes and we will do a Steve Reich video, um, which will have many
Can't
of you
wait.
scratching your heads. um, it's just hard for me to put together because it's just runs so deep. But anyway, it should be able to go up against Jim's Zorn video as the WTF of the channel. But anyway,
Okay. All right.
so for Zappa, it's more of not so much the rhythmic aspect, but the tonal aspect, I think.
Okay.
Comprend?
I think so. I think
I
I know where you're
think,
coming from.
yeah, okay. No, I think I understand. I think for
Okay.
me, when I kind of just to round out the and close out the Frank Zappa uh, angle of it, when I hear his guitar playing, for me, the bottom line is for me, Frank Zappa was a fantastic blues guitarist.
Sure.
There are like influences of blues in his playing that is just his tone was just, from my in my very humble opinion, bang on. It was just there, like a really good meaty uh tone in his guitar playing. So that's how I sort of ground myself when I listen to Frank Zappa. That's I have to remember he's a fantastic blues based guitarist. But
Well, like I said, the musicianship on this album is top notch.
yeah,
Their ability, you know, all of that is just fantastic. It's just what they do with it just doesn't resonate with me. So,
I
you know, and
100%
I can say that way about a lot of other prog, a lot of jazz. Um, you know, Jim talks about his vocabulary and explaining these things. He and I have had this conversation many times before. There's some things that are just not verbally quantifiable, and that's
fair enough.
okay. And
Fair
that's
enough.
just it. That's okay. So that's my go-to is it just doesn't resonate. Why on the Eagles, they got two that we just talked about, two songs that are in 3/4 time. One really resonates very strongly, but the other is like, ugh.
Okay.
It's just the way it hits, even though they have the same,
But
rhythmic or compositional elements.
but again, that's
That's what
just
we're
it.
talking
You
about.
could rack your brain until you're in a coma trying to figure out why a certain album or a certain song doesn't resonate with you. Bottom line is, if it doesn't resonate, it doesn't resonate. That's
Yeah,
that's the bottom line. And you don't need any justification. You don't need any, I mean, if you want to try and justify it, you're going to give yourself a stroke because, I mean, the stress of that,
sure,
who needs it? I mean, it is what it is.
sure.
So, I mean, and your views are just as valid as someone else's views
Yeah,
that the album does resonate with them. It doesn't make it different. It doesn't make it wrong. So it makes it
yeah,
different. And that's all it is.
yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Now, ladies and gentlemen, the final album
It brings us to the final album.
in our listing here for 50th albums celebrating 50th anniversary albums. Sorry. There is only coffee in my mug, ladies and gentlemen, I promise. From top-notch musicianship and songwriting to this, Bob Dylan and the band, the Basement Tapes, released June 26, 1975 on Columbia Records. a two CD or two album release. Uh, the album was recorded between 1967 and 1968, with overdubs being done in 1975. The album was produced by Bob Dylan and the band. The album has a playing time of 76 minutes and 41 seconds. I will curve my tongue until the very end. Jim?
Okay. So I think the first thing to understand about this record is that it's not really a 1975 record. It's a 1967 record because this is when the majority of it was recorded.
Duly noted.
And I think it's sort of important to sort of put in context what was going on in 1967. So just taking a quick look at the website Best Ever Albums, here's, a sampling of some of the top albums ranked by the interwebs for 1967 and see if you can spot the common theme. Sergeant Pepper, Velvet Underground and Nico, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix Experience, Love's Forever Changes, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Axis Bold as Love, Strange Days, also by The Doors, Disraeli Gear, Surrealistic Pillow, Days of Future Past, Safe as Milk by Captain Beefheart, Chelsea Girl by Nico. What are the kind of the common themes in those albums, gentlemen?
Hmm.
Well, I hear a lot of psych in there.
Yeah, psychedelia. Um,
Yeah,
Experimentation is the one word that comes to mind.
psych and experimentation, yeah, those are kind of the things that were really going hard, in that time frame. And
Yes.
in that environment,
Yes.
Bobby and his friends, left over from the Hawks,
Ooh, Bobby.
just
Okay, go on.
get together in a basement and basically go 180 degrees against the grain of what's going on musically at that time. Now, having said that, the stuff that they're doing here definitely points towards what Dylan would release later in 67, like John Wesley Harding, but it is a far cry from not only what's going on topically within the culture, but it's also very different from the epics that he was producing up to this point. The recent movie, A Complete Unknown, kind of gives you the sense of, Bob's compositional arc and, the type of stuff that he was doing in terms of like busting folk music wide open to sort of creating his own genres within popular music in terms of storytelling and theme and whatnot. And again, he just kind of stops all that and says, let's just get down to basics. And so what he's doing here with the band is going in and just really digging at the roots of popular music. And some of this stuff to me works really, really, really well. And some of it's just kind of, a shruggable joke. But, that's what happens when you've got a bunch of guys getting together making music with musicians of this caliber, is that you can get in and just run the gamut between, the jokey type songs of like Million Dollar Bash, but yet you can have, songs that are a lot deeper in there.
Yeah.
To me, the standouts on this album, um, Bessie Smith, Ain't No More Kane, You Ain't Going Nowhere, Don't You Tell Henry, and Open the Door Homer. I mean, of those five songs, two of them are Dylan tracks, Dylan singing. And I think the way this album works is that if Dylan wrote it, he sang on it. I think Tears of Rage might be a exception to that rule, but generally that's the rule here. So of those five songs that I mentioned, um, three of them are songs by the band. And to me, that's the amazing thing that comes from listening to this album is that the stepping stones that it takes to get from basement tapes to songs from the Big Pink and then the band, the Brown album following that, it's a very, very short step. All the nascent material, raw materials were here in these sessions of just really deep, heartfelt music that, isn't trying to impress, isn't trying to be consciousness expanding,
Yeah.
but it's really just about, it's the equivalent of let's get out our guitars and let's just make up songs and sing songs that we know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think it's amazing to sort of place this album in that context of 67. Again, in like 75, this just seems like kind of a head scratcher. So that's why I like to think of it within the time that it was recorded because I think it gives it a deeper resonance and kind of a deeper step in integrity and honesty
Yeah.
because it's like they're just being real. They're just making music.
Yeah.
They're not trying to be Clapton or Hendrix or the Beatles. They're just, you know, singing old standards,
Yeah.
old blues songs and whatnot. And I think it's just amazing from that standpoint. Do I pull this out and listen to it all the time? No. Would I run and make a beeline for the 6 CD, the complete basement tape set that was released?
There's a
No.
6 CD.
Yes, there is.
Sweet Jesus. Come
Um,
on.
and it would be interesting to hear just to kind of see more broadly, what they did over this time. But again, I think this album is just amazing for what it was at the time. I guess the modern equivalent would be, T-Bone Burnett putting out "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" when it did, and the impact that that made. So
Okay.
that's how I tend to think about the basement tapes.
Okay.
Um, I've spewed a lot. Others, please.
Okay. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, like you say, to look at it within the time frame it was recorded. This was early in the band's career. This was the same time they released music from Big Pink and the self-titled album, The Band. So it's curious to see what they do on this album with the mindset of, you know, all these young guys, um, and what they were doing, in their early days at the very beginning. Um,
Yeah. They're sounding like old men on their porch passing around guitars,
yeah,
and yet they're
yeah,
like barely out of their 20s, if
yeah.
that.
I think the band is one of the best backup bands for Dylan.
Hmm.
I think they fit very well within his style. I think Dylan's vocals are in very good shape, um, which they should be at this point in the late 60s. We're just so used to hearing that stereotypical stuff of the later years,
Hmm.
when his voice wasn't in good standing. My favorite songs are, I think the best songs are the Dylan centered songs.
Hmm.
Um, I feel it has a fun opener. I think Odds and Ends is a fun little opener. Um, $1 Million Dash is a good chuckle and swinging. I think my favorite is You Ain't Going Nowhere off of this double album. But other than that, I mean, I've never been a big fan of the band other than just specific songs. There's not a single band album. I mean, even music from Big Pink, I would pick and choose from the songs. This Americana, folk rock, or whatever you want to call it. Um, some artists in songs uh, resonate with me, and just some don't. just in general. Um, but I think this is like for me, this is kind of an archive of a point in time.
Hmm.
I almost don't consider it a legitimate album by Dylan or the band. Um, because even the Dylan songs on this album to me don't hold up to, what he did on his actual Dylan albums at the time. So, but it is very wonderfully representative, I think, more of the band than it is of Dylan.
Hmm.
Okay.
So,
Um, for me, uh, hmm, I've heard of this album's existence, and I know the background. What happened was Dylan visited the band while they were rehearsing in Woodstock, and he was amazed how they of their setup, of how they had a makeshift studio in the basement of Big Pink, and they just went down and recorded whenever they wanted to go and record, whenever the inspiration hit them. So he walked in and he's like, "Well, how do you record? How do you do this?" "Well, we just do it this way." And we have this set up. He's like, "You're shitting me. Really? This is how you do it?" Like, so he was just struck by how of the simplicity of the situation, right? And ladies and gentlemen, if you watch the documentary Once Were Brothers of the band, they go into this in better description than I can. On Crave, it's also on DVD if you want to get it. Um, I do feel that this was Dylan. If you watch the movie A Complete Unknown, this was Dylan rebelling against Columbia and what they expected of him. This was just a group of friends getting together and recording some music that they wanted to record. Whether it was ever going to be released, who gave a shit? They were just going to record stuff that they wanted to record. And the one thing I like about Dylan is that he felt the band were his contemporaries. He never, ever believed that the band were his backup group. They were on the same level in terms of their importance and their contribution to music or modern music at the time. And I 1000% believe that to this day, that that's how he felt. And he was quite pissed off that the audiences that they were playing to at the time didn't share his sentiment and his belief. In terms of the music on the album, I think that um, it's good, it's experimental, and it's a good sonic snapshot of where they were at that point in time. And I got to admit, vocally, Dylan's voice was grating on my nerves at a few points, and like listening to it. I would have to sit and listen to the album overall, like get into it again, like just to try and sonically digest what they're trying to do in terms of the music. Um, I like it. Is it his best release? Is it a compelling release? No. Um, but was it something that he felt he needed to do? 1000%. You can get this album, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, on CD on Amazon.ca for as little as 25.95. There are 24 songs over two CDs. If you want something that's for you, that's if you're a Dylan or a fan of the band, and if you want an album that is again a good sonic snapshot of where where these artists were at the time, get this album. But for me, I still would have to sit and listen to it some more. There isn't really a song out of the 24 that stands out. Now that I know that there's a six disc version of it, it kind of compels me to check it out. As Ken's laughing, of course it compels him to check it out. But Yeah. It is what it is. It's an interesting release. Um, I just have to dive into it some more.
Mhm.
Yeah, just a couple
Yeah,
more
right.
comments about that, Armando. Yeah, the so this was recorded like we were saying in 67. 68 is when the band released music from Big Pink. Um, from a Dylan standpoint, the recording of this album follows Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde.
Hmm.
Um, so it's an interesting, again, kind of a touch point to kind of understand how he went from Blonde on Blonde, which I think most of us would say is pretty much a masterpiece. Or at least half the songs are, to John Wesley Harding. If taking it just on face value of what was released from an album standpoint, it's another one of those knee-jerk head fakes. It's like, oh my God, what's going on here? Dylan's really taken a left turn. The basement tapes sort of fills in what that left turn was all about. And certainly as he
Yeah.
needed to recover from his motorcycle accident, I think that happened around that time. This was an essential piece of him kind of bolstering his songwriting chops and sort of probably regaining some confidence. And definitely I agree with what you were saying is that the band is probably, his kindred spirits and the musicians that most reflected and were able to articulate what Bob wanted to do musically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also got to be said that the band themselves, when they were touring with him, his main friendship in the band was with Robbie Robertson.
Mhm.
And Levon Helm at one point got frustrated playing with Dylan because he really didn't like the music that they were doing, so he had to leave at one point because he was just frustrated with the musical direction, or as he saw it, the lack of musical direction that the band were taking. So I just wanted to put that in. But
Yeah.
so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 50th album anniversaries part two. Please put down in the comments your opinions on these releases from part two and part one that were released again in June of 1975. Been quite the list. It's been quite the list for these run of two episodes. I want to thank Frick and Frack, Jim and Ken for coming along with me on this journey. And we have more ideas that we're working on for shows. Also, please click like and subscribe, and do hit the notification bell to keep yourselves on top of any new content we've got coming up. And as soon as we can flush out these new ideas that we've got and get them down on, I guess you call them tape, we'll get them to you as quick as we can. All right. So please look after yourselves and one another, and we'll see you soon with more episodes. Bye for now.